She walked into the first-class cabin like she had done 100 times before, composed, precise, dressed in a tailored dark suit that didn't whisper wealth. It commanded it. One hand clutched her boarding pass, the other held her phone steady. But before Olivia Brooks could reach seat 1A, a cold hand of resistance blocked her path. "You're in the wrong section," the flight attendant snapped, her arm extended like a barrier. Behind her, a woman in pearls sneered. "People like you don't sit here." What they didn't know was, they just insulted the wrong woman. The hum of the aircraft was a dull backdrop to Olivia Brooks's quiet footsteps as she stepped into the first-class cabin of Flight 882. Her heels met the carpet with a rhythmic precision, echoing the kind of silent authority that didn't need announcement. In her right hand, a crisp boarding pass bore the seat number 1A. Her left hand cradled a sleek black phone, its screen still glowing with the last message she'd sent before boarding. "Flight 882, all set. Touch base in Chicago." She had made this trip over 100 times, from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. Meetings, mergers, and sometimes just moments of quiet in a life that rarely allowed it. But today, everything would take a turn. "Excuse me, ma'am." A voice cut through her focus as she approached the front row. Olivia looked up to see a flight attendant standing directly in her path. The woman's posture was stiff, her lips pressed into a firm line. Her name tag read E. Jensen. "Economy is that way," Jensen said, raising an arm and pointing behind Olivia without so much as glancing at her boarding pass. Her tone carried no warmth, only authority, unearned and uninvited. Olivia didn't flinch. She simply held up the boarding pass. "I believe I'm in seat 1A. Jensen didn't even look at it. "I understand there's been some confusion," she said, stepping closer now, almost shielding the first-class seats behind her like sacred ground. "But we can't have delays. Please proceed to your assigned section." "I am," Olivia said, her voice level. Before another word could pass, a sharp voice chimed in from seat 1B. "Oh, for heaven's sake, are we still doing this?" A woman in her early 50s adjusted the collar of her pearl-white blazer and set down her glass of sparkling water with an audible clink. Her hair was blonde, sculpted, and perfectly set. Her eyes, cold and calculating, landed on Olivia like lasers. "She doesn't belong here." The words struck not only Olivia, but every nearby passenger within earshot. The sentence hovered in the air, ugly and blatant. The cabin didn't go silent, but it tensed. Shoulders stiffened, gazes shifted, and a few phones rose discreetly. Olivia turned slightly to face the woman. "Excuse me?" "I said what I said," the woman replied, not blinking. "I've flown this airline for over 20 years, and I know what the standard looks like." Before Olivia could respond, Jensen nodded in agreement. "We're working to clear things up." The scene felt surreal, predictable, yet somehow stunning every time it played out. "Would you mind checking my boarding pass again?" Olivia asked, still calm, still civil. She handed it over without hesitation. Jensen took it with reluctance, as though the paper itself was untrustworthy. She scanned it with a device clipped to her hip. A soft beep followed, then a short pause. She murmured, eyes narrowing. "It appears this seat's been flagged. Something about invalid upgrade status. You'll need to speak with the service desk, ma'am." Olivia's brow twitched, but only slightly. "Flagged? That's not possible." "I'm afraid it's not up to me," Jensen said quickly, already motioning toward the aisle. "We're just following protocol." From her seat, the woman in 1B leaned over. "Don't worry, dear," she said, voice dripping condescension. "Business class is still very comfortable. I'm sure you'll find it more familiar." Olivia let the words roll over her. She didn't reply. Instead, she pulled her phone closer and tapped the screen, making a brief note. Her thumb hovered over the send button, but she didn't press it yet. Not yet. "I've flown this exact route for 8 years, she said, half to herself, half to the room. "This very seat." Jensen didn't respond. Her body language suggested she expected Olivia to turn around, walk back to coach, and disappear. Instead, Olivia stepped aside, just 2 steps, and waited. Passengers around her watched closely, some with discomfort, others with a strange kind of hunger for spectacle. There was always something about conflict in first class that brought out the worst in curiosity. "What's the holdup now?" a man muttered from 2 rows behind. "We're trying to leave on time." "I'm sure she's just confused," said another, a woman with a Chanel tote and a frown of impatient pity. But Olivia wasn't confused. She was calculating. With her back straight and her eyes still scanning the cabin, she tapped a message into her phone. Not long, just 1 line. "Proceed to phase 1. Prepare confirmation." She slipped the phone into her coat pocket, took a steady breath, and made no move to argue or explain. Not yet. Jensen shifted, uneasy under the silence. "Ma'am, we really need to have you seated or we'll have to delay pushback." "I understand," Olivia said evenly. "You may call your supervisor." From seat 1B, the blonde woman scoffed. "Oh, don't waste everyone's time. Just admit it. You tried to sneak into a seat you didn't pay for, and now you're playing the victim." Olivia turned, her eyes finally locking with the woman's. "Do you make it a habit to speak for strangers? Or just those who look like me?" Victoria, though her name hadn't yet been revealed, blinked, then smirked. "Touchy." Jensen stepped between them. "Please, both of you, let's stay calm." "I'm perfectly calm," Olivia said, her tone cool. "You may call your supervisor now." As Jensen radioed for assistance, Olivia stepped aside once more, this time resting against the wall near the entryway, still within sight of her intended seat. The tension in the cabin wasn't just discomfort anymore. It was turning into something else, anticipation. The kind of collective stillness that builds before a storm breaks. The tension hadn't broken. It merely shifted. As Olivia waited near the entryway, her phone still resting in her coat pocket, the soft murmur of nearby passengers buzzed like static. She heard her name pass through lips that didn't know her, felt eyes judge her clothes, her posture, her silence. But she stood still, like a stone in a current. A few minutes later, the flight attendant returned, not alone. Behind her came a woman in a navy blue uniform, tailored to perfection, her badge polished until it caught the cabin light like glass. Her heels clicked sharply on the floor as she approached, clipboard in hand and professionalism stitched into every movement. Her name tag read S. McConnell. "Good evening," she said curtly, not to Olivia, but to the other woman still lounging in 1B. "Victoria, I'm so sorry about this," Sharon McConnell said with a sympathetic tilt of her head. "I heard there was an issue with the seating arrangement." Olivia noticed it immediately, the subtle familiarity in Sharon's voice, the way she addressed Victoria by name without needing an introduction, the slight lean in as though they were resuming a previous conversation. "It's absolutely ridiculous," Victoria replied, straightening her blazer and crossing one leg over the other. "This woman is trying to claim seat 1A. She clearly doesn't belong here. I mean, it's just absurd." Sharon gave a practiced nod and then finally turned to Olivia, her expression cooling by several degrees. "Ma'am, I'm Sharon McConnell, lead supervisor for this flight. I understand there's been a misunderstanding regarding your seating. May I see your boarding pass and ID?" Olivia said nothing at first. She simply reached into her coat, removed the neatly folded boarding pass, and retrieved her government-issued ID from a slim leather holder. She handed both over without hesitation. Sharon glanced at them, barely. Her eyes moved over the information too quickly to be genuinely reviewing anything. Her fingers tightened slightly on the paper, and she offered a shallow smile. "Thank you," she said, folding the documents and tucking them behind her clipboard without giving them back. "I'll just verify this in the system." Olivia didn't object. Not yet. She merely shifted her weight from one heel to the other, head slightly tilted. Sharon took a half step closer to Victoria, and then, in a voice barely audible, but just loud enough for Olivia to catch, the supervisor murmured, "I've handled it. She won't make it to Chicago." The words hit like static behind Olivia's ribs. Cold, quiet, deliberate. Victoria gave a short, satisfied nod. Her lips curved upward in a slow, smug grin. And in that moment, everything shifted. Olivia's expression didn't change. Her hands didn't move, but the breath she exhaled came out just a touch slower than before. She looked around the cabin, not at the passengers this time, but at the layout. Exit rows, seat numbers, flight crew positions, angles of visibility. She was calculating. From row 2, a man lowered his newspaper and narrowed his eyes, clearly picking up on something. A woman a few seats back turned her phone to airplane mode, then hesitated before slipping it into her bag. The tension was spreading, infecting the entire front cabin like a whisper of smoke. "Excuse me," Olivia said, her voice soft but direct. "Am I being accused of something specific?" Sharon turned, already halfway through typing something on her tablet. "Of course not," she replied sweetly. "We're just verifying the details. Standard protocol. Is it standard to address other passengers by name, but not the person whose documents you're holding?" Olivia asked. There was a moment of silence. Just a moment. "Victoria is a Platinum Elite member," Sharon said quickly, as though that explained everything. "And I am not?" Olivia's tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. Sharon blinked, then turned back to her tablet. "I'll be back in just a moment." As she stepped away, Olivia watched the supervisor's posture, the speed of her retreat, the direction of her glance. She wasn't going to check anything. She was going to make a call. Olivia knew that type, knew exactly which kind of people built their entire careers on networking, loyalty, and silent hierarchies. But what Sharon didn't know was, Olivia had built empires on exposing systems just like that. The woman in 1B, Victoria, leaned forward, still emboldened. "Listen, sweetheart," she began, lowering her voice. "It's best not to make a fuss. People notice, especially when you're out of place." "Do they?" Olivia asked. Victoria shrugged. "You should know, image matters." "I agree," Olivia said, her tone sharp as a scalpel. "Which is why you should be very careful what yours says in the next 30 minutes. The threat wasn't shouted. It wasn't even spoken loudly enough for anyone else to hear. But Victoria froze. Something in Olivia's eyes, calm, unblinking, sent a sliver of doubt straight through her confidence. Just then, the junior flight attendant returned. Jensen. Her face looked more stressed than before. "Ma'am," she said to Olivia, avoiding eye contact. "Until we sort this out, would you mind waiting in the galley?" "No," Olivia replied simply. There was a pause, the kind of pause that feels like a long drop before impact. Jensen blinked. I can call security if necessary." "Please do," Olivia said. "And when they arrive, I'll be happy to provide them with the name of the person who falsified the system records." "I'm sorry," Jensen said, caught off guard. "You're not," Olivia said calmly. "But you will be." A few seats behind them, the same man who had lowered his paper earlier now pulled out his phone. His camera wasn't on yet, but his finger hovered over the record button. The sense of unease in the cabin was becoming tangible. Victoria broke the silence again. "Why are you making this difficult? All this drama for a seat?" "It's not about the seat," Olivia said. "It's about what you assumed when you saw who held it." Sharon returned just then, her face slightly flushed. "I've spoken with the captain. We're going to resolve this calmly." "Excellent," Olivia said, lifting her chin. "Then I'd like to speak with the captain myself." Sharon hesitated. "That won't be possible at the moment." "Then perhaps someone higher than the captain," Olivia said. "Would you like me to make the call?" That was the first time Sharon's expression shifted, from polite irritation to something much closer to fear. The walk down the narrow aisle felt longer than usual. Olivia Brooks moved with quiet precision, not one step faster or slower than necessary. She held no expression on her face, no sign of irritation or defeat. But inside, the shift in seating, from the seat she paid for in first class to this, wasn't just a matter of location. It was a statement. Passengers glanced up as she passed. Most didn't smile. A few exchanged whispers. One woman with overplucked eyebrows actually shifted her purse inward, as though Olivia might reach in and snatch it mid-stride. A man in a golf shirt narrowed his eyes, then looked away with a smirk of quiet amusement. Row 17, aisle seat. It wasn't what she'd chosen, but it would do. For now. Olivia sat, crossing her legs with the same calm grace she had at the front of the plane. The hum of voices around her barely registered. She pulled out her phone, tapped a few quiet commands into a secure messaging app, and slid the device back into her coat. The show above might be paused, but the performance was far from over. "Excuse me, ma'am?" A soft voice broke her concentration. She turned, expecting another insult, another passive-aggressive complaint about disruptions or protocol. But the voice belonged to a young man with an unmistakably nervous energy. He wore the airline's standard uniform, pressed navy shirt, black tie. But there was something different in his eyes. Not judgment, not suspicion, recognition. I'm sorry, but," he began, then paused, glancing down the aisle to make sure no one was listening. "Ms. Brooks?" Olivia tilted her head slightly. "Yes?" His voice lowered to a whisper. "You don't remember me, do you?" She studied his face, searching for familiarity. It was there, buried under the crisp corporate grooming. A name floated up from memory, like a bubble in still water. "Ethan?" He smiled, wide, disbelieving. "Yes, Ethan Liu. I interned at Calyx Ventures, summer of 2016. I was in the accelerator program. You gave me that slot at the last minute when someone dropped out." Olivia's posture softened, just slightly. "I remember, you pitched a sustainable micro-logistics platform." His smile turned sheepish, "and crashed and burned at the finals. But learned more in 3 months than most people do in 3 years, Olivia said gently. Ethan's eyes sparkled, then quickly darted around. He stepped in closer, lowering his voice further. "I saw what happened up there," he said. "They moved you out of 1A? That doesn't make any sense." "It doesn't need to," Olivia replied. "It only needs to look justifiable on paper." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "That woman in 1B, she's been flying with us a lot lately. Loud, demanding. Always calls for supervisors like she's a queen. And Sharon, she's been pushing crew around for years." Olivia leaned back in her seat. "So, you've seen this pattern before?" "Not with people like you," he said. "Usually it's a fight between status-hungry elites. But this feels targeted." Olivia met his gaze evenly. "It is." Ethan hesitated, then took a small step closer. "Do you want me to make a call?" he asked. "Not officially, I mean, discreetly." It was a simple question, but it held layers. It wasn't just about loyalty. It was about awareness, allyship, risk. Olivia didn't answer right away. She studied him for a moment, measuring the intent in his eyes. Then she asked quietly, "Who would you call?" "My brother," Ethan replied. "He's a compliance director at the FAA. He flags bias reports for federal review." A small smile touched Olivia's lips, faint but real. "You've grown up, Ethan." He flushed. "Well, I try." She tapped her fingers lightly on the armrest, considering. "No call," she said. "Not yet, but stay close." Ethan nodded, then hesitated again. "They're going to try to make this go away, you know. Keep it internal, sweep it." "That's what they always try," Olivia said, "until they can't." He opened his mouth to say more, then thought better of it and stepped away, returning to the galley with the look of a man who'd just stepped off the edge of a cliff but trusted what lay below. Around Olivia, passengers continued their low chatter. Some were pretending not to glance over. Others weren't bothering to hide it. 2 teenage boys in hoodies nudged each other and whispered. A middle-aged woman whispered to her husband, "She's probably one of those people who fakes being rich. You know, the scammers." Olivia didn't react. She was used to it, the muttering, the judgment. The weight of being unexpected in rooms designed for someone else. That part wasn't new. What was new was the flicker of hope. A name, a face, a connection, a thread to pull. She looked toward the front of the plane, where first class had already been sealed off behind a drawn curtain. "They think I've lost," she whispered under her breath, almost amused. But what they didn't know was, Olivia Brooks never played for the short game. Seated in row 17, Olivia Brooks watched the drawn curtain at the front of the aircraft as if it were a concrete wall. It wasn't just fabric. It was a symbol, a barrier, the physical manifestation of everything unspoken but deeply understood. You don't belong. But she did. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket and opened the encrypted messenger app linked only to her executive team. The screen lit up with a fingerprint scan, then a blinking cursor. "Protocol 7, stand by. Wait for Captain Trigger." She hit send and slipped the phone back into her coat without another word. Protocol 7 had only been activated twice in 10 years. It was designed for emergencies, not the kind with turbulence and oxygen masks, but the kind that shook the foundation of public trust. It alerted the corporate PR crisis team, legal advisors, and an AI that monitored trending media keywords. It was preemptive, quiet, and devastatingly effective when triggered. But it required one final condition to go live. The captain. Olivia closed her eyes for a brief second, just enough to steel herself. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" The voice was polite, hesitant. She opened her eyes to see a middle-aged Asian American couple asking about the window and middle seats next to hers. She nodded. "Please." They sat in silence at first, shuffling quietly, settling in. The man removed a hardcover book from his carry-on. The woman folded her cardigan neatly across her lap, but Olivia could feel their glances. Brief, cautious. "You okay?" the woman asked gently after a moment. Olivia turned toward her. "Excuse me? I saw what happened when you boarded," the woman said. "It didn't seem right." Her husband gave a quick, warning glance, as if to say, "Don't get involved." Olivia noticed it but didn't react. "I'm used to it," Olivia replied, her tone even. The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice. "You shouldn't have to be." For the first time, Olivia looked directly at her. Really looked. The woman's eyes held something Olivia recognized. A lifetime of observing, absorbing, choosing silence because it was safer. Her husband sat rigid, his hands folded tightly around the book as if it were a shield. "It was wrong," the woman added. "But it's not always safe to say something." "I understand," Olivia said softly. "And thank you for seeing it." The conversation ended there, replaced by the low hum of engines and cabin chatter. 15 minutes passed. The plane had yet to taxi from the gate. Olivia noticed Jensen, the flight attendant, speaking quietly to someone at the front, her hand covering her mic as she relayed a message through the crew intercom. Then a second attendant arrived. This one had 4 stripes on her epaulets and carried herself with clipped authority. She moved directly to Olivia's row. "Ms. Brooks?" she asked stiffly. Olivia nodded. "The captain received your request to speak. He has asked me to inform you that at this time he will not be available." Olivia raised one eyebrow, slowly. "And why is that?" "There are instructions," the woman said, choosing her words with care. "From a higher authority within the airline that no disruption is to be permitted in first class." "No disruption," Olivia repeated, voice sharp but quiet. The woman looked uneasy. "I'm just relaying the message." Olivia let the silence stretch. Finally, she asked, "May I have the captain's name?" The woman hesitated. "Captain James Porter." Olivia nodded slowly. "And may I quote you, Ms. Senior Purser Rachel Connors, in that the captain is declining my request due to a directive from above?" Connors took a breath. "That's correct." "Very well," Olivia said. Connors gave a small bow of the head and turned away. As she walked back down the aisle, Olivia could feel the temperature shift, not physically, but in tone. The Asian couple beside her sat rigid now, eyes forward. Around her, whispers had begun again. She's trying to make trouble. Why would the captain refuse if she was important? She must be faking. I heard someone say she tried to sneak into first class. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. The curtain separating first class and economy remained closed. It may as well have been welded shut. Olivia folded her hands in her lap, her breathing steady, but her chest tight. This wasn't new, but the way it kept happening still found its way under her skin. Across the aisle, a man discreetly took a photo of her with his phone, pretending to scroll through apps. In row 18, a woman began live streaming on Instagram, whispering about entitled passengers who try to cheat the system. She caught every angle, except the truth, and still, Olivia didn't move. She sat upright, gaze steady, hands motionless. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly see, was that every silent moment was being recorded, not just digitally, but mentally. Every word, every sideways glance, every slight. They were all bricks being laid in a case that was growing stronger by the minute. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was building an audit trail, one that would burn clean through every facade they thought protected them. The woman next to her finally whispered, "Do you want us to say something?" Olivia turned toward her and replied gently, "Not unless it's for yourself. I don't need saving." There was a pause. Then the woman replied, "Neither did I, until someone saved me." The words lingered longer than either of them expected. Up front, the aircraft door finally closed. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. A low chime signaled pre-takeoff safety checks. The curtain stayed shut. But deep beneath Olivia's composed exterior, something else was unfolding, louder than any intercom announcement. A reckoning had begun. The overhead lights dimmed again as the aircraft began taxiing slowly toward the runway. Seatbelts clicked. Window shades adjusted. Whispered commentary about that woman in row 17 rippled through the cabin like background static. But Olivia Brooks wasn't listening. She reached into her coat and retrieved a slim, matte black tablet from a hidden inner pocket. Its logo, a discreet silver emblem, shimmered under the faint cabin lighting. She tapped it on. The screen awakened with quiet authority. Her fingers moved quickly, past the security screens, past 2 levels of encrypted access, until she reached a folder labeled ID Alpha Wilco. The moment she tapped it, the system attempted to pull up her executive profile. Full name, title, corporate assets, photo ID, board affiliations, and biometric verification. The loading symbol spun once, twice, then stalled. A buffering icon began circling on screen, stubborn and endless. Olivia frowned. She glanced at the top corner. No signal. The in-flight Wi-Fi connection bar blinked red. She refreshed once. Nothing. Then again. Still nothing. In her peripherals, she could feel eyes on her. The couple beside her pretended not to watch, but their attention hovered like static electricity. Across the aisle, the woman still live streaming had tilted her camera slightly in Olivia's direction. She tried a final refresh. Connection lost. Reconnect to secure cloud server. It was like watching a brick wall rise between her and her defense, inch by inch. She lowered the tablet calmly, masking the churn inside her gut. That was when the voice rang out from several rows forward. "Oh, I knew it!" Victoria's tone was loud, performative, perfectly pitched for public theater. "She's a fraud!" Heads turned. Olivia's name hadn't been spoken, but the direction of the outburst made it crystal clear. "I told you she didn't belong in first class," Victoria continued, waving her phone in the air like a torch. "Now she's down here pretending to be some executive? Please." She had stood up halfway in her seat, her phone angled to film herself with the cabin behind her as background drama. "I want this on record," she said, staring into the lens. "This woman tried to claim a seat in first class she didn't pay for, and now she's down here faking credentials on some broken tablet? Scam alert!" The words were crafted for maximum engagement, and they landed. Around the cabin, other passengers began watching the live stream from their phones, some whispering, some nodding. "Oh, I'm watching it right now," a teenager muttered behind Olivia. "It's already got like 2,000 views." "She's being exposed," said another voice near the emergency row. "This is wild. Why would someone pretend to be a CEO?" a woman asked, half laughing, half suspicious. "What's the end game?" "She probably does this on multiple airlines," a man chimed in. "They should call the authorities before the plane lands." Olivia said nothing. She sat still, tablet still open on her lap, the failed connection screen glowing like an accusation. Her expression didn't change, but a slow, controlled breath passed through her lips. Ethan, the young male flight attendant who had spoken with her earlier, peeked out from the galley. His eyes locked onto hers. He gave a subtle nod, questioning, offering. She gave the tiniest shake of her head. Not yet. Victoria, emboldened, continued. "Oh, and now she's being quiet again," she told her camera. "Of course. That's what they do when they're caught. Play the victim. Well, not today." She pointed the camera directly toward Olivia. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Miss CEO?" she taunted. "Or do you want to show us another fake website?" Olivia finally looked up and met her gaze. Not with anger, not with fear, with pity. But Victoria didn't recognize the expression. She was too busy performing. "You know what?" Victoria said, turning back to the camera. "This is exactly what's wrong with the system. People like her think they can scream racism anytime they get caught doing something shady." Gasps sounded. A few passengers gave awkward chuckles. Others murmured disapproval, but no one interrupted her. Not yet. The Asian American woman beside Olivia spoke under her breath. "Is this really happening?" Her husband leaned toward Olivia, barely audible. "Is there anything we can do?" Olivia didn't respond immediately. She simply lifted the tablet, turned it off, and placed it in her bag. The screen may have gone dark, but her strategy hadn't. Just then, Victoria received a ping from her phone, then another, and another. Her smug grin faltered slightly as she glanced down at the notifications flooding her screen. Hundreds of comments, dozens of reposts, but not all in her favor. Some read, "Why are you recording a woman without her consent? Why does she need to prove anything to you? Wow, this is exactly what discrimination looks like." A few comments went viral in real time, reshared by influencer accounts calling out Victoria's behavior. But the tide hadn't fully turned. Not yet. For now, the loudest voice was still Victoria's. The dominant impression was still doubt, not clarity. Olivia watched it unfold like she was watching a storm through bulletproof glass. Not panicking, not resisting, just waiting for the exact right moment. But inside, even she felt it. That flash of vulnerability. That sliver of helplessness that creeps in when all your power is suddenly invisible. Her Wi-Fi was dead. Her documents were inaccessible. Her voice, for the moment, was being drowned out by a woman with a camera and no shame. And in that moment, just for a flicker, the viewers, the passengers, the world beyond that plane, thought she'd lost. Victoria Hale was in full performance mode. She stood just outside her first-class seat, still holding her phone up like a microphone in a courtroom drama. Her voice carried easily through the aircraft, laced with that smug certainty that only the truly oblivious could maintain. "I mean, come on," she told her viewers. "This is what happens when people think they're above the rules. This woman tried to hijack first class like she owned the airline or something." Olivia Brooks sat motionless in row 17, arms folded, expression unreadable. The hum of the engines, the murmurs of the passengers, the dull glow of phones capturing it all. It was a blur around her. Then the cabin lights flickered. Just once. Then again. At first, no one thought much of it. Electrical hiccups were common. But a few seconds later, the overhead speakers cracked with static, followed by a voice. Not from the flight attendants, not even from the pilot. This one was deeper, older, deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice began, "this is Raymond Carter, Chief Executive Officer of Skybridge Airlines. I apologize for the interruption, but I need your full attention for the next 60 seconds. The cabin froze. Phones lowered. Conversations stopped. Even the woman live streaming finally lowered her camera, brows knitting with confusion. Raymond Carter's name carried weight. Even those who didn't follow corporate news recognized it. His face had graced enough magazine covers, industry panels, and keynote addresses over the last decade. He wasn't just a CEO. He was the CEO, and he was speaking directly to them. There has been a developing situation aboard Flight 882, which has reached my desk within the last 15 minutes. Due to the nature of this situation, I have issued a temporary order to halt this flight immediately before takeoff. Whispers broke out. Wait, is this real? Did he say halt the flight? This has never happened. Carter's voice continued, unfazed. It has come to our attention that a passenger, Ms. Olivia Brooks, has been the target of discriminatory treatment by our staff and possibly other passengers. For those unaware, Ms. Brooks is not only a respected executive. A pause. She is the current chairwoman of Wilco Group, our parent company and the primary stakeholder in Skybridge Airlines. There it was, the twist no one saw coming. A beat of silence followed. Then a collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Audible. Real. Even Victoria, who had just moments before stood at the peak of her own self-righteous high ground, now looked like someone had yanked the earth from under her heels. Her phone slipped slightly in her hand. Olivia, still seated, didn't move. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes sharpened, focused. Raymond Carter continued, Ms. Brooks's presence aboard this flight should have prompted the highest level of discretion and service. Instead, she was subjected to a sequence of events that require immediate investigation and corrective action. I want to be clear. Any staff involved in discriminatory decisions will be suspended pending a full review. Any passenger who harassed Ms. Brooks may be subject to permanent removal from our flight registry. Another ripple of gasps. Phones began recording again, but this time the cameras weren't on Olivia. They were turning toward the people who had spoken too loudly, judged too quickly, and laughed too easily. Victoria stumbled back into her seat, face pale. A man 2 rows up who had mocked Olivia under his breath earlier now stared down at his shoes like they were the most fascinating objects in the world. One of the teenage boys who had laughed at the live stream whispered, "Oh my God, she owns the airline." The Asian-American couple next to Olivia sat in stunned silence. Carter's voice pressed on. "We are proud of our commitment to inclusion and integrity, and we take full responsibility for the failure that occurred on Flight 882. Ms. Brooks, if you are able to hear this, please accept our deepest apologies. Your leadership at Wilco is one of the reasons Skybridge exists today." The intercom clicked off, and for a long moment, there was no sound at all. Just the muted roar of stunned realization crashing over the entire aircraft like a silent tidal wave. Then, a quiet chime from the cockpit. The captain's voice, this time, came on. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Porter. We've been instructed to return to the gate for further review. Please remain seated." Passengers shifted, but no one said a word. In row 17, Olivia slowly unfolded her hands, sat a little straighter, and reached once again into her coat. She pulled out the same tablet, still silent, still offline, but she didn't need it now. The message had been delivered. Victoria, now visibly trembling, finally looked back at Olivia. Their eyes met. Gone was the smug superiority. Gone was the sneer. In its place, pure, undiluted fear. "I didn't know," she whispered, barely audible. "I had no idea who you were." Olivia stared at her for a long second, then replied, without malice, "And if I'd been exactly who you thought I was, would your behavior have been any different?" Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. From somewhere near the back of the plane, a voice muttered, "Damn!" The curtain at the front of the cabin was pulled back. Ethan, the young flight attendant, emerged, visibly shaken but now brimming with silent vindication. He nodded once at Olivia, She gave the faintest of nods in return. The game had shifted, the queen had been revealed, and the entire board just flipped. The announcement had barely ended when the emotional aftershock began pulsing through the cabin. Silence lingered, thick and strained. It wasn't just the weight of authority that had silenced the passengers. It was the dawning realization that the truth had not only arrived, but it had landed with the force of an earthquake. Raymond Carter, the name that typically appeared in stock market reports and aviation trade expos, had just spoken directly to their flight, interrupting its departure and placing all eyes squarely on the woman in row 17. Olivia Brooks, chairwoman of Wilco Group, the parent company of Skybridge Airlines. The quiet didn't last long. Whispers began, low, urgent, disbelief mixing with embarrassment. Phones trembled in hands. Live streams ended mid-sentence. Up front, Victoria Hales sank into her seat, looking like a person who had fallen from a 40-story window and was only now realizing the ground had arrived. Her phone buzzed repeatedly in her palm. Messages, comments, tags, but she couldn't bring herself to look. The camera app was still open, her own shocked face frozen on screen. Beside her, Sharon McConnell stood stiff, her clipboard trembling slightly, her lips parted but mute. It was over, and they both knew it. The final nail came moments later when a uniformed ground marshal stepped into the cabin through the front entrance. He exchanged a quick word with Captain Porter, then turned and walked straight toward the back of the aircraft. Not toward Olivia, toward Victoria. "Ma'am," he said quietly, but firmly, "I need you to come with me." "What? Why?" Her voice cracked. "You're being temporarily removed from the aircraft at the request of airline executive security. You'll be debriefed in a private lounge." I didn't do anything," she stammered. "You've got the wrong person." The marshal didn't respond. He just stepped aside slightly, making it clear that this was not a suggestion. Passengers turned in their seats, watching the woman who had, not 15 minutes earlier, shouted about fake executives and entitlement, now gather her belongings with shaking hands. "Wait, just give me a second," she muttered, fumbling with her purse. One by one, the passengers around her parted like waves. No one offered help. No one offered sympathy. As Victoria shuffled out, she dared one last glance over her shoulder, toward row 17. Olivia hadn't moved. She simply returned the look with the same quiet power that had unnerved Victoria since the beginning. But this wasn't the end. Because while Victoria was being escorted off the plane, another development was already in motion, one that most passengers hadn't even realized was unfolding behind the scenes. In Wilco Group's Crisis Management Command Center, located just outside New York, a real-time social sentiment dashboard was running. Triggered by Olivia's activation of Protocol 7, the system had started tracking hashtags, mentions, and live stream data the moment Victoria began filming. It didn't just identify videos, it identified people. Facial recognition pulled metadata from public footage. Accounts were matched to personal emails. Those emails, in turn, were cross-referenced with LinkedIn profiles, company domains, and professional contact databases. Every person who had shared, commented on, or amplified defamatory content about Olivia was flagged. By the time Victoria was off the plane, 8 passengers had been identified by name, employer, and title. A man from 8C, an investment banker who'd mocked Olivia, was a vice president at a firm that had recently pitched for a Wilco acquisition. A woman from 14A, who'd recorded Olivia's conversation and called her a system scammer, was a mid-level PR strategist at a tech startup funded by a Wilco-affiliated VC. 2 teenagers who had shared memes from the live stream attended a high school partnered with a Wilco scholarship program. And all of them? Flagged, cataloged, ready for review. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere had completely reversed. The people who had laughed now looked pale. Those who had ignored now sat stiff, their phones turned off, their eyes forward. One man discreetly deleted tweets, but the damage was done. Screenshots never sleep, and the ones who had spoken up, few as they were now being looked at with new respect. Ethan, the flight attendant, emerged from the galley again, his posture straighter than before. He nodded at Olivia as he passed, no longer just the quiet intern turned crewman. He had picked the right side of history and knew it. Captain Porter's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be returning to our scheduled departure shortly. We thank you for your patience." But the real shift didn't come from the flight schedule. It came from the looks now directed at Olivia. No longer curiosity, no longer suspicion, but recognition. She didn't need to stand. She didn't need to say a word. She had been tried by rumor, judged by arrogance, and exonerated by truth. And now, every passenger knew exactly who sat in 17C. One of the most powerful women in the aviation industry, and the reason their flight and their silence had just become a global headline. The silence in the aircraft had taken on a new tone, no longer uncomfortable but heavy with consequence. Every person aboard now sat with a different posture, less entitled, less dismissive, some even afraid. The intercom chimed again, but this time, it wasn't the captain. It was Sharon McConnell's name being called, not by the crew, but by the lead ground operations officer who had stepped aboard after Victoria's removal. "Ms. McConnell," the officer said with quiet precision, "you're requested for immediate offboarding and personnel review. Your credentials have been deactivated." The words were like a knife through the cabin's still air. Sharon blinked, not understanding at first. She gripped her clipboard as if it might somehow protect her. I'm the senior supervisor," she stammered. "This must be a mistake." The officer remained expressionless. "Ma'am, your access has already been revoked. Please gather your belongings." "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. "I was following protocol." But it was too late. Her own badge, when she tried to scan it against the service panel, lit up red. Access denied. Olivia didn't even look in her direction. She didn't need to. It wasn't revenge. It was justice, unfolding with clinical precision. Sharon gathered her clipboard, a folder, and her dignity, or what was left of it. She walked down the aisle slowly, head bowed, the weight of every whispered judgment now pointed directly at her. No one clapped. No one spoke. That kind of punishment didn't need applause. It just needed acknowledgement. She passed Olivia's row and paused, as if to say something. But Olivia kept her eyes on the forward bulkhead, the message clear. "You're no longer part of this flight, or this system." Sharon moved on. A few minutes later, another notification pinged. This time not through the aircraft, but on Victoria Hale's personal phone, still buzzing despite her being removed from the plane. Passengers nearby could see the notification flash. "HR notice. Effective immediately. You are placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Please do not return to the office until contacted by Compliance Counsel." The sender, Everton Consulting Group, a Fortune 500 PR firm. The irony hit fast and hard. Because Victoria wasn't just any employee. She was the Director of Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives. Her bio, until just hours ago, had boasted of training global teams in cultural awareness, empathy, and equitable decision-making. And now, her own behavior, recorded, broadcast, and publicly condemned, had become Exhibit A in exactly what she claimed to fight. Screenshots of her live stream were already circulating. Dozens of posts contrasted her job title with her words on the plane. Journalists had picked up the story. Her LinkedIn page had been archived multiple times in case she tried to edit it. By evening, @Victoria Hale would be trending for all the wrong reasons. And Olivia? She still hadn't said a single word publicly. She didn't need to. The world was already doing the speaking for her. Midway through the flight, finally airborne now, the cabin crew offered beverages. The tray paused near Olivia's row. Ethan, the young flight attendant, met her eyes. "Anything I can get you, Ms. Brooks?" She considered, then said, "Still water, please. No ice." He handed it over with both hands, a subtle sign of respect. Across the aisle, A passenger who had laughed earlier tried to offer a tight smile. Olivia didn't return it. She sipped her water and turned to her window. Justice was its own refreshment. But even in the middle of retribution, there were still threads unraveling. In the back of the cabin, a man in a sharp blazer, row 22, seat A, fidgeted with his phone. His face had grown pale the moment Carter's voice came over the speaker. He hadn't said much since, but his earlier commentary, mocking, loud, clearly targeted, had been captured by more than one live stream. Now, his name was floating through internal Slack channels at his employer, a private equity firm with significant exposure to Wilco Group. He thought his comments had disappeared into the air. He didn't know his voice had been caught, not by passengers, by an AI tool integrated with Wilco's crisis monitoring protocol. Within minutes of Protocol 7 being activated, voice prints were being analyzed and cross-matched with publicly available data. His LinkedIn page had a public profile. His name was now flagged for internal review at his firm. The firm, coincidentally, had a pending pitch with Wilco's acquisitions department. That pitch would never be heard. He didn't know it yet, but the fallout had begun. He was no longer anonymous. None of them were. And that was the deeper twist. This wasn't just a personal reckoning. It was a systemic one. The very systems that allowed people like Sharon and Victoria to climb into positions of faux authority, unchecked, unexamined, were now collapsing under the weight of a truth they couldn't delete, spin, or deny. And the most brutal part? They were being undone by the very tools they had championed. Victoria's own diversity framework had mandated digital accountability. Sharon's department had trained others in ethical conduct modules. And now both women were being processed through protocols they had helped design. Justice didn't just come for them, it came through them. And that, more than anything else, left the cabin with a feeling that wasn't just satisfaction, it was poetic. A kind of corporate karma. And Olivia Brooks? Still quiet, still seated, still watching. Because her silence was never weakness, it was strategy. By the time Flight 882 reached cruising altitude, the internet was already at war with itself. News outlets had latched onto the story like vultures sensing a shift in the winds. Headlines ranged from scathing to sensational. Executive power play, airline halts flight over discrimination scandal. She was told she didn't belong. Turns out, she owned the airline. Justice at 35,000 feet. Olivia Brooks breaks the internet with silent power. But amidst the storm of viral outrage and corporate backpedaling, a different video was beginning to rise to the top. Quiet, unscripted, and deeply human. It came from a passenger seated beside Olivia, the Asian American woman who had said almost nothing until it mattered most. In her short, grainy clip, she didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She simply spoke into her front-facing camera with a calm that pierced louder than outrage. I watched a woman get humiliated for existing in a space others didn't think she belonged in. I watched her stay quiet, not because she was weak, but because she was watching. I didn't say anything at first, and I regret that. But I'm speaking now, because silence is complicity. The camera panned to Olivia, seated beside her, still dignified, still quiet. Then back to the woman, who added, she didn't raise her voice, but she raised the standard. That video, uploaded with the humble caption, "Justice looks like this," exploded within an hour. It was shared by celebrities, politicians, civil rights groups. Hashtags formed around it. Olivia Brooks, #she belongs here, #justice. In the skies. And unlike the hateful streams and condescending commentary that came before, this clip resonated. It wasn't about drama, it was about dignity. Meanwhile, on the plane, Olivia remained detached from the chaos unfolding across the digital world. She had no need to check the trending pages or public reactions. Her team was already managing every angle. Instead, she stared out the window, her reflection superimposed against the vast, endless sky. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a quiet breath, not from relief, but from resolve. Ethan, the young flight attendant, approached her seat again. This time, his eyes carried something new. Gratitude. "Miss Brooks," he said softly, "the captain asked if you'd like to make a statement to the passengers." Olivia looked up, thoughtful. "No." Ethan hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I'm not interested in speeches," she replied, "but I would like to use the PA system for something else." Moments later, the intercom dinged. Her voice, calm and measured, filled the cabin, not from the seat of authority, but from the center of humility. "Good afternoon. This is Olivia Brooks." Passengers perked up immediately, ears tuned, eyes wide. "I know you've all witnessed something unusual today. I also know that many of you are processing what this means, not just for this flight, but for the spaces you live and work in every day." She paused. "I won't lecture you. I won't list my titles or my holdings. What I will say is this: moments like this are not anomalies. They are systemic, and silence has allowed them to remain that way." The cabin was so still, the sound of the engines felt distant. But change doesn't always start with shouting. Sometimes it starts with watching, with documenting, with showing up differently the next time. She paused again, and then, "Today, I'm announcing a new initiative. It's called Justice in the Skies, a cross-industry coalition committed to transforming how airlines train staff, handle complaints, and protect passengers from bias, whether overt or subtle." Murmurs filled the air. Passengers glanced at each other, surprised, inspired. "This isn't about me. It's about making sure that the next time someone is questioned for how they look, speak, or sit, there is a system in place to protect them, not punish them." Another beat. "You've all been part of something today. The question now is, what will you do differently because of it?" The intercom clicked off. The cabin was quiet. Then slowly, a woman near the back began to clap, tentatively, then another, and another. It wasn't a standing ovation. It wasn't theatrical. It was earnest. A genuine acknowledgement that something profound had occurred, and they had all borne witness. Back on the ground, the impact was already echoing. Wilco's press release had gone live. Today, Wilco Group, in partnership with several global airlines, launches Justice in the Skies, a new corporate accountability initiative. The program will feature anonymous reporting systems, whistleblower protection, AI-assisted bias monitoring, mandatory equity training for frontline and executive staff, independent third-party audits of discrimination complaints. Media outlets scrambled to cover it. PR firms frantically issued statements trying to distance themselves from the incident or align with Olivia's mission, depending on which side of the camera they'd fallen on. And those who had been silent passengers on the plane now became messengers on the ground. The teenage boys who had once mocked were now tweeting apologies. The man in the business suit from row 22 deactivated his accounts. Victoria Hale's corporate office was flooded with demands for accountability, but none of them could delete the moment the world changed direction, when a woman, told to sit down and shut up, used the altitude not to escape, but to elevate the entire conversation. Olivia remained in her seat, sipping water, watching clouds drift by. Justice wasn't loud today. It was clear, and it had taken flight. The applause that followed Olivia's announcement had faded, but the silence it left behind was not the same as before. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't confused. It was reflective. Like the entire cabin had collectively realized they'd just been handed a mirror, and for the first time, they had to look. Some passengers quietly returned to their books or tablets. Others stared at the seat in front of them, pretending to think about something else while, in truth, confronting the weight of what they'd just witnessed. For several minutes, no one approached Olivia, not out of fear, but out of respect, until a shadow fell across the aisle seat next to her. She looked up. It was him, the businessman from row 22, crisp gray suit, Rolex watch, the one who had chuckled when Victoria called her a fake, the one who had muttered about people trying to game the system while sipping his whiskey. He looked different now, not because he had changed clothes, because he had shed his certainty. His hands were clasped in front of him, posture tentative, voice low. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "may I sit for a moment?" Olivia gestured to the seat beside her without a word. He sat down, straightened his cuffs, then let out a breath that sounded far more honest than anything he'd said earlier that day. "I owe you an apology." She turned slightly, but didn't speak. "I judged you," he continued. "The moment I saw you walk into first class, He paused, swallowing. "I assumed you didn't belong. And when things escalated, I didn't step in. I watched, and I let her narrative shape mine." Still, Olivia said nothing. He took another breath. "I was wrong." Only then did she respond. "Because I turned out to be someone important?" The question didn't come with hostility. It came like a scalpel, clean, precise, surgical. The man looked down at his hands. I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe at first, but not now." She tilted her head. "Explain." He hesitated. "When I saw how calm you were, how you let everyone else unravel while you just watched, it made me realize I've never really seen that kind of power before. I thought power looked loud, obvious, brash. You proved me wrong." "And yet," she said gently, "if I hadn't had a title, a company, a CEO calling from the ground, would you be sitting here now?" He didn't answer immediately, because there was no comfortable answer. "I'd like to believe I would," he said softly. "But you don't know." "No," he admitted. "I don't." Olivia turned back to the window. "That's the problem," she said. He waited, sensing she wasn't finished. "People want to do the right thing," she continued, "but they wait until it's safe to do so, until there's no risk, until they know how the story ends." The man looked away. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I accept your apology," Olivia replied, "but I want you to understand something. This isn't about me." He furrowed his brow. "How do you mean?" "This will pass for me," she said. "My board will defend me. My assets will protect me. My name will keep doors open." Then she looked him in the eye. "But the next woman who looks like me, who doesn't have a title or a following, what happens to her when you make the same assumptions?" His throat tightened. "She gets buried," he whispered. Olivia didn't need to say more. He stood slowly, nodded, and returned to his seat, carrying more weight than when he'd walked up the aisle. Around them, other passengers had listened, not because they were eavesdropping, but because something in Olivia's presence made people pay attention, made them hold their breath, made them think. The Asian couple in the next row exchanged a quiet glance. The woman squeezed her husband's hand. One of the teenagers who had earlier laughed now leaned toward his screen, typing furiously. Not another joke, but a personal post that began with, "I messed up. I saw something wrong, and I laughed. But now I'm learning why that matters." Across the cabin, the ripple continued. It wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. But it was honest. And in a world saturated with noise, honesty had become rare enough to feel radical. Ethan, the young flight attendant, passed by again. This time, instead of a nod, he paused. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "thank you." "For what?" she asked. "For showing us how it's done." She gave him a small, genuine smile, the first in hours. "You'll do better next time," she said. "I will." He meant it. And as he walked away, a few other passengers, quietly, discreetly, began making notes on their phones, not just to record, but to reflect, to rewrite the posts they hadn't made, to draft emails to HR departments they hadn't known they needed, to send apologies, not to Olivia, but to people in their own lives they had dismissed, overlooked, or doubted. Not everyone, but some. Enough. Enough to start something, because the real turnaround wasn't just on this flight. It was in each of them. The plane had leveled off at cruising altitude, and the initial flurry of post-incident movement, the apologies, the policy announcements, the trending hashtags, had settled into a new kind of quiet. Not the awkward silence that had followed Olivia's removal from first class, but something deeper. reflective, weighted. People weren't just passengers anymore. They were participants in a moment. And Olivia Brooks, still poised in row 17, wasn't done yet. "Excuse me," she said softly to Ethan, the young flight attendant, when he passed by once more. "Would you be willing to ask the captain if I may use the cabin mic again, briefly?" Ethan didn't hesitate this time. "Of course." He disappeared toward the front of the aircraft. Moments later, a soft chime rang through the cabin, and Olivia stood. She didn't walk to the front. She didn't make a show. She simply turned in her seat, facing the center of the cabin. No cameras were raised, not because passengers didn't want to film, but because something in Olivia's presence had made it clear. This was not for content. It was for connection. "Thank you for your patience," she began, her voice steady. "I know today has been unusual." A few passengers smiled. Others nodded solemnly. "I've asked to have a few minutes with those of you who are open to it," she continued. "Not to scold, not to lecture, but to talk, honestly, without sound bites, without recording." Several heads turned. Some passengers began unbuckling their seatbelts. A few moved toward the aisle. Olivia gestured toward the open space between sections, just ahead of the economy bulkhead. Within minutes, about a dozen passengers had gathered around her, standing, sitting on armrests, leaning quietly against seats. Ethan stood near the back, not intruding, but attentive. "I want to ask you something," Olivia said, eyes moving gently across the group. "When you saw what was happening earlier, what did you feel?" The businessman who had apologized earlier was the first to speak. "Embarrassed. I thought I was seeing a dispute. I didn't realize it was a pattern, a system." Olivia nodded. The woman beside him added, "I thought, don't get involved. I told myself it wasn't my business. But the truth is, I didn't want to risk being wrong." From behind them, the teenage boy raised a tentative hand. "I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. It felt easier than feeling awkward." He looked down, ashamed. Olivia met his eyes and said gently, "Thank you for your honesty." Then, the Asian woman who had filmed the now viral video stepped forward. "I hesitated too," she said. "I knew what I was seeing. I felt it before, but I waited until I saw the tide turn to speak. That's what I hate most, that I needed permission." A heavy pause settled over the group. Then Olivia asked quietly, "Do you think this would have ended the same way if I hadn't had power?" They knew the answer. She didn't need to say it. "I've been in rooms where no one believed I belonged," she said. "But I had the title, the wealth, the leverage. Most people who go through what I went through today don't." She looked around. "They walk off the plane humiliated. They file a complaint that gets investigated internally. They get labeled as difficult, and nothing changes." Murmurs of agreement. The man in the gray suit cleared his throat. "How do we make sure this moment becomes more than just a headline?" Olivia's gaze sharpened. "That's the question. It's not what happened today, it's what happens next." She paused, then said with intention, "What will you do next time?" The question hit like a quiet tremor. No accusation, no judgment, just a mirror. "What will you do?" she repeated. "The next time you see someone treated unfairly? When the world hasn't gone viral yet? When there's no CEO watching?" The group stood still, absorbing it. Then, from the back, a voice said, "Speak up, even if it's uncomfortable." Another added, "Believe people the first time, not after everyone else does." A third, "Ask questions, don't assume." The teenage boy said, "Don't laugh." Even the man in the suit admitted, "Be the first to stand, not the safest." Olivia smiled, not broadly, but with a kind of quiet approval. "Good," she said. "Not perfect, but good." Then she did something unexpected. She sat down, right on the floor of the plane, cross-legged, in the center of the group. Not because she needed rest, but because she wanted to lower herself to their level, not in status, but in spirit. And one by one, the passengers did the same. They sat around her, like a story circle, like something ancient. Ethan, still at the galley, smiled faintly and whispered to another crew member, "This feels like history." For the next 20 minutes, Olivia said little. She listened. The passengers shared their stories of discrimination they'd witnessed, moments they'd stayed silent, times they'd spoken and paid for it. No one interrupted. No one filmed. They were just human. And in that space, thousands of feet above the world, they reclaimed something that most people forget while rushing through terminals, ignoring injustice, and chasing comfort: agency. The choice to be different, to act different, to choose better. When the group finally disbanded, passengers returned to their seats, not lighter, but more grounded. As Olivia settled back into 17C, the teenage boy tapped her arm. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He fidgeted. "You didn't yell or fight or argue. Why?" Olivia thought for a moment, then said, "Because they were expecting me to." The boy nodded slowly. "So what did you do instead?" She smiled. "I made them listen." As the aircraft began its descent into San Francisco, the golden light of late afternoon spilled across the cabin windows. Clouds broke apart below them, revealing the coastline in soft, flickering glimpses, almost as if the sky itself were opening gently for a landing it had long awaited. The atmosphere inside Flight 882 had shifted again. Not dramatic, not charged, just still. And in that stillness was something sacred: transformation. No more raised voices, no more performances, just passengers, thinking, remembering, rewriting themselves. Olivia Brooks remained in seat 17C, calm as ever. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the skyline drawing closer. But her mind wasn't in the present moment. It was thinking forward, of the meetings to come, the policies to draft, the lives to quietly shift. Justice didn't end when the wheels touched the ground. It began there. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Porter said, "we'll be landing shortly. On behalf of the crew, we appreciate your patience and cooperation throughout this journey." The crew began their final pass. Seat backs upright, tray tables locked. As Ethan reached row 17, he handed Olivia a small note, scribbled in pen. "Thank you for letting the rest of us catch up." She read it, nodded once, then tucked it into her blazer pocket. A few rows behind her, the Asian American woman and her husband shared a quiet glance. They didn't speak, but there was a softness in their eyes that hadn't been there before. A recognition, not of status, but of shared truth. Just before landing, Olivia pulled out her phone for the first time in over an hour. She opened LinkedIn, typed a short message, and hit post. "The seat you try to deny someone today may belong to your future, but more importantly, it belongs to a human being right now. Choose better." The moment they touched down, the post exploded. Thousands of likes in minutes, reposts, screenshots, commentaries. It wasn't the most dramatic thing she'd said in the last 12 hours, but it was the clearest. At the gate, when the aircraft doors finally opened, no one rushed to stand. No one elbowed forward. They waited, watched. And when Olivia rose to leave, the aisle silently parted. Not out of fear, not out of spectacle, but out of respect. She didn't nod, didn't wave. She simply walked with the same quiet certainty that had upended an entire power structure without shouting once. Before disembarking, she stopped beside the couple who had stood by her. "You never told me your names," she said. "I'm Mina," the woman replied. "And this is Ken." Olivia smiled. "Mina and Ken. I'd like to invite you to a roundtable next month. We're building a global initiative to rethink passenger equity. I think you two would bring valuable perspective." They blinked, surprised. "You mean us?" "I mean exactly you," Olivia said. "Real people. Not influencers, not consultants, witnesses. That's what we need more of." Mina placed her hand over her heart. "We'd be honored." Olivia nodded once and continued down the aisle. Behind her, phones began buzzing again, not with the chaos of earlier, but with the echo of what had unfolded. And some of those echoes were growing louder. 2 hours later, one of the most unlikely videos began to trend. Not from a news network, not from Olivia's official channels, but from a woman in 13D. The same woman who had stayed silent for the entire flight, arms crossed, eyes skeptical. Her face now appeared on camera, raw and unfiltered. "I didn't speak up," she said. "Not because I agreed, but because I thought it wasn't my place. I thought staying out of it made me neutral." She exhaled slowly. "But I was wrong. I watched a woman get torn apart because she didn't look the part, and I did nothing. And today, I watched her turn that cruelty into policy, into dignity, into something bigger." She looked straight into the camera. "It changed how I see the world. More importantly, it changed how I see myself." The video ended with a single line, white text on a black screen. "What will you do next time?" By midnight, the video had been viewed over 5 million times. Meanwhile, Victoria Hale sat in her condo, lights dimmed, phone on silent. Her laptop screen still showed the HR email. Her calendar was empty for the next 3 months. A second tab was open, her own diversity training deck, the one she'd presented to dozens of Fortune 500 companies. Slide 3 still read, "Equity is not a buzzword, it's a behavior." She stared at it for a long time, and for the first time in her career, she realized that knowing the language meant nothing if you couldn't live the lesson. She closed the laptop. Across town, Mina and Ken sat side by side on their couch. Mina refreshed her inbox again. There it was, an official email from Wilco Group's Global Equity Initiative. "Dear Mina and Ken, as discussed aboard Flight 882, we are pleased to invite you to the inaugural Stakeholder Roundtable for Justice in the Skies." Ken turned to his wife. "We were just trying to get to San Francisco." Mina smiled, eyes misty. "And instead, we arrived somewhere better." Back at Wilco headquarters, Olivia stood alone in her office. No assistants, no board members, no cameras, just her, and the echo of a moment that had already changed the world. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flip the table. She didn't need to, because the truth, when paired with clarity, resonates. It lingers, it grows, and sometimes it flies.